Hi everyone, this is Rohit from Rise and Mastery, and today I'm excited to have Ida Tin, who's the co-founder and CEO of Clue, which is the most trusted female health app. Prior to starting Clue, Ida co-founded a motorcycle touring company, MotoMundo. It is also the author of the Danish best-selling book called Directness. Welcome to the show, Ida.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So you've had quite an adventurous journey. It's quite interesting to know that you started off with Moto Mundo. You traveled the world. How did you get in this world of startups?
It's actually a really funny story that starts in London because I got lost at a university. It was called London College of Printing back then.
Oh,
And I was trying to find someplace in this huge building. I got lost. I ended up in an office where they were waiting to do an interview with somebody. They knew I was not the right person. I knew I was in the wrong place. And we still did the interview. And that was for an entrepreneurship course. And I did it. And they asked, like, what's your business idea? And I was like, Crystal bead jewelry. I just said something. And then I built my first business in crystal bead jewelry.
oh, super interesting.
Yeah.
And did you run that business for quite some time before you moved on to Moto Mando?
I did it for a while, just enough to earn enough money to go to Mexico and buy a motorcycle and travel around there for 6 months. I understood that I did not want to be in the fashion industry.
Okay.
And then I did many things in between. And then I started the motorcycle touring company with my dad later.
Oh, interesting. And how did you get your start with Moto Mando? And you travel the world, quite adventurous. How did it all start about?
Yeah, so my parents are these kind of crazy adventurers who travel around on motorcycles with me and my brother since I was 1 year old. They did 4 long travels around the world. So after I had graduated from business school, like lots of different things happened, but in the end, I was sitting with my dad and he wanted to make, a change in his life and do something new. And I was sitting there not wanting to work in a corporate. And we were like, let's do a motorcycle touring company together. We know about motorcycle touring. And so we did that. And it was a great lifestyle for 5 years. And then eventually I was like, okay, if I keep riding a motorcycle as my profession, I will get hurt. I should stop while it's still good.
Oh, very, very interesting. And how is it working with a family member? I've seen, lot of couples who have come on the podcast, but how is it working with your father? And what advice you give to founders or who are listening to this podcast about a father-daughter or a father-son relationship?
Yeah. It's so funny because other people would be like, oh yeah, I also work with my brother, or they'll be like, I could never work with
Yeah.
and I don't know, it's just been this pattern in my life where I have started something and before very long, my partner at the time would start working with me. It has happened like, I think 3 times. Basically every company I've started, I apparently had a new partner every time, but they have ended up working with me. And so it actually felt quite natural to work with my dad. We were a pretty good team, I think. I think if you build a business and it gets to a certain level, it might get more complicated because at some point, in the beginning, you do everything and you do it as well as you can. And then as a company matures, you need to be more professional in decisions. And at that point, it might get more tricky. But for me, it was great. I liked it.
Okay. And especially if you're working with a family member or like a partner, how do you how do you give hard feedback to them, because you're
Well,
working with them so closely?
So I worked for many years with my ex-partner that I built Clue with, and we were pretty good at giving hard feedback to each other. I think maybe a little bit too good. That was not really the issue. And I think for maybe especially many women, it can be really beneficial to work with your partner because it makes the whole life work juggle a little bit easier because you're 2 people who are both trying to make a family work and a business. And your careers are equally important. Your business meetings are equally important. You maybe earn the same salary, and you're equally passionate about what you're doing. But it also meant that we talked about Clue all the time. Like from we woke up in the morning, the last thing we talked about. And then at some point, some years, and we were like, okay, like if one person needs a break, we just like, hey, let's pause this. And we got good at being like, okay, let's not talk about this. But I think for the people around us, it was quite challenging at times. I don't think investors liked it that much. And we definitely had our shitty dynamics. Like, I'll be totally honest. Like we fought a lot, and it was not just rosy. It was really hard too. But I want to say to that I think a lot of investors are scared off when they see founder couples. But as a founder couple, and maybe especially if you have children together, you really have so much at stake that you will do a lot of things to make it work. I think it kept us together a little bit like, when people had a farm in the old days, and you cannot run a farm alone, so you had to stay together.
Yeah.
Sometimes we felt like that.
Okay, interesting. And you're famous for coining the word femtech, and you built a company, Clue. How did the idea come about, and about Clue and about femtech?
So I had the idea for Clue back in 2009, and it really came from this strong wish to have a new type of birth control for myself and for the planet. Honestly, there had been no innovation really in family planning methods since the late 50s. I mean, for so long.
Right.
And I really felt that the world needed that. So I wanted to build the technology that could help women work kind of with their hormones instead of overriding them. So I wanted to build a home diagnostics that could measure hormones in saliva. That was my initial idea, to have this really precise sort of data point on which days can I actually get pregnant, because it turns out it ain't that many during a cycle.
Right.
So that was how I got started with Clue. And the term femtech came some years later, because I could see that there was so much activity. People were building things that felt kind of neighboring to what Clue was building, but we didn't have a shared language. And I had this strong hypothesis that if we had one term that would unite us all, it would be so much easier for investors to see us, for media to talk about this new emerging category in tech, and for people to find each other. We're building things that, were related.
Got it. Interesting. And you were able to build quite a large user base. I was wondering, what were some of the tactics you used to build a user base, especially for such a niche product? Any advice you would give to founders or who are looking to grow the downloads for the app?
So you might think of it as a niche product or a niche market.
Right.
But it turns out that it's relevant to 50% of the world's population for 40 years of their lives. It is anything but niche. And of course, for people who want to conceive, or for men who care about, avoiding pregnancy, it might also be quite relevant for them to understand their partner's cycle. So arguably, it's relevant for 100% of the world's population, or maybe just a little bit less. So as we were thinking about building this hardware, we knew that hardware is hard. It takes time. And my co-founder, Hans, he was like, we should start by building a period tracking app, because in that way we can start building a customer base, which was a really important decision, because then a few years down the line, we realized that, well, we can actually get to the same, results only by having data and not actually having the hardware. And at that point, we let go of the hardware and continued sort of on the data route. So how do we grow? Well, no growth happens by accident. I mean, I think there's a lot of knowledge on how you do digital marketing so that you grow. We were early to start working with YouTubers. It was called back then, now it's called influencers, or maybe something new I don't even know about. But and we could do that with a lot of integrity, because the people that we worked with were our target group, and they found the product like authentically meaningful in their own lives. And I think that was one thing that really carried us through, and still does, was that we like we really care about what it is that we're building. We really wanted to create a product that was truly helpful for people, and we wanted to do it with a lot of scientific integrity. And we still care deeply about people's privacy, data privacy. So I think over time, people got to know Clue as a company they felt comfortable sharing this really intimate data with. In a world where increasingly tech has like a trust problem.
Yeah. Quite interesting. And you were also able to raise around $7 million from Union Square Ventures, and then later on from Nokia Growth Partners. I've been a fan of Fred Wilson and the USV group. How did you manage to convince USV to invest into your company?
Yes. So I believe that Hans had met Albert, which is the partner that we have worked with all these years, at some conference, had a conversation and kind of thought they would be a great fund. And then we got the opportunity to pitch to them. And we had a newborn, so I was breastfeeding in that pitch meeting. Like I was literally breastfeeding as I was pitching. And I think they were like, if somebody is to build a big company in this segment, there has to be a woman in that company. And they then said yes. And we have, then you mentioned a couple of our investors. We now have, a good bunch more institutional investors and private family funds in that mix. Yeah, so how do we convince them? I mean, you never really know what happens. It's sometimes very much like a black box. Also, very often why you didn't get the check. You're like, what? This meeting went so fine. They loved it. And then they come with a no, and you're like, what happened? You have no idea. So I do like that USV are based on a thesis. They have sort of an intellectual ground that they're standing on, which if I can get a little bit pointy, I would say a lot of investors maybe don't have. But they kind of follow things that are hot in the moment, but don't really formulate their own idea about what they want to support, because in the end, venture capitalists has a really big say in what is being built in this world right now, and what is being built in technology is forming our world. So it's a huge responsibility, I think, venture capitalists and founders have, which is something I don't think we talk quite enough about.
Yeah. Interesting. And you've been part of quite a few startups. How important do you think is speed of execution for in startups, and especially when it comes to quality of work? Do you think is quality of work as important as the speed of execution?
I think it depends a lot what you're trying to build. But if you're building something that touches people's health, you have to be very thoughtful. And we got FDA clearance for a product to help people not get pregnant. And it's all about quality. Both because as a regulated company, you have to guarantee quality. You have to guarantee safety. That is what regulation is. And that means you have to prove that you're doing everything in your power to keep users safe. And that means you have a quality management system, you do surveillance of the result. Like you're grown up as a company at that point to be able to do that, at least in some aspects. It's not fast, and it shouldn't be fast. It should be high quality. And then it's the reality of being a startup where you have to be crazy as dude, because you are running out of money all the time and you are competing with other people building stuff. So you have to try and get these balances right. But our take was, if you gear a whole company around quality, in the end, you will be fast. You will do things right. And it actually came to to a point where recently we're like, okay, we have a 10-year-old tech stack in our product. This is not helpful anymore. Let's rebuild the whole app from the beginning up. And so we did. We just built the whole thing over and have now actually managed to have almost all our users on the new mobile app, really, which was an incredible achievement from the tech part of the company.
Yeah. So incredible. And you know, what can startups do to deliberately increase the speed of execution in order to, you know, especially when it comes to product and tech part, you know, or what can they do to reiterate and make sure that the execution accelerates?
You know, having a strong focus is definitely the beginning, which sounds easy. It's really hard to do. It's so painful. You constantly have to not do things that you desperately feel you have to do and want to do. So that's the first bitter pill to swallow. But then I think how you build a culture where people can really trust each other, where they can communicate really well, where they care about each other, where they can give that honest piece of feedback that will make things flow again. Like the relational intelligence is something that will actually make things go faster. But it's those skills that it takes leadership attention to cultivate, and it also takes investment and time. And I think they are very often overlooked because they look like they are not making us faster. It might even be slow. We might have to sit in a circle and talk about emotions. But actually, I think it gives you a lot of speed at the end, because it also makes the organization resilient, and it makes you able to, you know, have a team who are really putting their best foot forward all the time. What you don't want is a sluggish kind of, you know, morale or motivation, and everybody's sort of, you know, not really doing anything. Like that's a horror scenario. So if you want people who really care, you know, figure out a culture where you make people feel human and feel each other as humans.
Got it. And you know, you interestingly mentioned about the talent which is there in the company, but especially when it comes to early stage startup, do you think is it okay to hire a B player, or should you wait for an A player to come and wait for that A player, or would you advise founders to, you know, have a B player to start off with, and then when you have a bit of attraction, then hire somebody who's an A player?
You know, it's not like your applicants walk in through the door with like an A or a B on their forehead. You know, most likely it's not what's available that determines who you get. It's actually your human ability to understand what human is sitting in front of you, and for you to understand what you really need. Because often I think part of the hiring challenge is, did we actually really know what we needed? Sometimes, you know, a few months in, you're like, oh, actually, we hired a person who's great, but this is not really what we need. So I think I don't like so much thinking about whether people are A or B players as such. I think, you know, you always want to hire the best one you can find.
Yeah. But
then how do you make the ones you have A players? How do you train people and support people and grow people and invest into people? And then now I said all the things that I deeply feel and think, but then if I have to be really pragmatic, wait and get the A player. And then I will also say in the beginning, you need people who are good at many things, like generalists, and then as the company matures, you need more and more specialization. But what I learned, I would say over the years, is hire somebody who has a lot of mental health in them. It's tough being in a startup, not because we're not kind to each other, all of that. Like in a best case scenario, it's a great place to work, but it's still tough because there is a lot of insecurity, and you try things that don't work, and you have to change all the time. What you built a year ago, you can scrap it, build it. So it's a challenging place to be. So as a leader, find people that you feel are like ready to learn, ready to grow, or, you know, sort of it's not that people have to be perfect, and everybody has something going on in their mind that can be challenging, but somebody who's willing to work with what's challenging, I think that's, I hire for that.
Okay, interesting. And especially, when you're building Clue, how did you look at focus and prioritization, and especially when it comes to a product, how did you look at what to be prioritized on?
I don't think we were always as good at it as we are now. I think we also really learned the hard way, where we're like, oh, okay, we were trying to do too much, which made us too slow, or we're making things and we build a product, but it took for long, and now we have to pivot to do something that is like faster, earning us money. Like, we've made many mistakes, like, but I mean, it's really that simple, that you make a list of things you want to build and you're like, okay, but what's going to be on top? Okay, that's the one thing we do. And if you have a huge team and you're like, maybe you can afford two things, but like, and sometimes, things will help you. But like for us, for instance, we had to get FDA clearance. That was like the one thing we had to get right. It's just organized everything. And it took absolutely everything we had.
Okay, got it. And you coined the term FemTech, and you built a great brand. What does brand mean to you?
Brand?
Yeah.
Brand is, in my mind, how you tell people who you are. It's a way to say, hey, users, you can choose all these different things out there, and this is who we are. Now you have a free choice to choose us if you like this. And so for us, it was always about how do we communicate who we really are. And it goes into all the tiny details all the time, like, how do you think about your illustrations, your colors, your fonts, the pictures you choose, your slogans, your marketing material for the app stores? And you just have this kind of inner navigation of like, does this feel true? Does this feel inclusive? Does it feel whatever your value are? And I think we built a very authentic and strong brand. I don't think we are always as good as leveraging it as we could have been, or maybe we're still not as good at it. I don't know, but oh, sorry about that. This is my daughter calling. I'm just going to take this really quick, otherwise she's going to keep calling.
Sure. Yeah, interesting. I wanted to understand, what are the single biggest mistake founders make when it comes to branding these days?
I would say if you're trying to be something you're not, that's never going to go well. Like, if you have to think hard about what your brand is, I would say stop the brand conversation and have a value conversation instead.
Okay, interesting. And you talked about a team culture. I was wondering, how does the founder or the leadership team build a place of safety for their employees, so that they can debate about things, and they just not yes man to the founder, and they can articulate what they want to. They want to be heard in the company.
I love that question. How do you create safety for your team? And it's complex. And I think you have to be honest and say there's some parts of safety that we cannot create. We might run out of money, our product might fail, the competition might kill us. Like, there's all these parts, but we can have relational safety. And that means that if, I'll be honest, I'll be transparent, I'll listen to you. I'll go ask for your opinion. So for instance, I had something called skip level meetings that I learned from some CEO. I think it was from Twitter or somewhere. And the idea was before Twitter happened. And the idea was that you go out and you set up a meeting with a random collection of people from the organization, 5, 10 people, whatever. And then you ask them like, what's not working right now in the organization? And also what is working? And you just get like an unfiltered, as much as possible, data flow back from across the organization. And I think that's, having everybody feel that the leadership will go and actually really listen. And then often I would be like, okay, and I would loop back to them, okay, this is all the things I've heard. So they knew that I had actually heard it. And then I would say, these couple of things I'm going to take care of. And I would bring them back to the management team and say, like, these are things I've heard. What are we going to do about them? And then at the all hands meeting, I would be like, these are some of the things I've heard, and here's what we're doing. So there really was this feedback loop. Now that I mentioned value, I'd also say when we formulated the values of Clue, I had the whole team come on an offsite. We took a hike at a beautiful place somewhere, and I was like, tell me, how do you perceive Clue? Like, who are we? And they would describe what values they felt that we were living. And then I would go back with the leadership team and say, okay, the whole things we've heard, we condense it. Then we went back to the team and be like, do you like, what about this? Like, these are the values we heard, we condensed them. And then they gave feedback again. I was like, oh, this one, you didn't go, And then it was a mix of what we heard, what we wanted to aspire to. And then we're like, here are the values. And that way, everybody had been part of this formulation and debate about who we were. And I think that made everybody feel that they could relate to the values we then formulated in the end. So these are examples how you include people and actually really listen. And obviously there are like 1,000 things you do. It's a mindset. If you have the mindset that you actually care about what people are saying, you will create safety. You have to actually care.
I think the you also wrote a best-selling book called Directness. What made you write the book?
So I had done a 2-year motorcycle solo trip in the US in sort of the desert regions of the US. And it was a travel, like a book about my journey, but it was also very much a book about my inner journey and kind of my considerations about life. I was in my late 20s, so before starting a family and company, and I wanted to write because I felt I had so many questions about like, how do you actually make these big choices about life, like career and family and love, and I felt that there are so many norms in our culture about these things, and I guess I was like double clicking on some of these norms and be like, really, why, what? So as I was exploring that, I felt maybe it would be helpful for other people to follow me in that process.
Yeah, interesting, because before the call we discussed about the new book which is coming out. Really excited to know about the new book that you're writing and what is it all about.
Yeah, so I have learned so much being a CEO and founder for 12 years at Blue, and I wanted to give something back to people who are maybe at the beginning of this journey, and to people who are in the broader industry. So venture capitalists, people building sort of network hubs, accelerators, like lots of people in tech who are not actually, founders. And I have a lot of things where I'm like, hold on, like, why are we doing it like this? This doesn't make much sense. And I definitely have some criticisms, I guess, about how our systems work. So I wanted to write to support, but also definitely to question how we're doing things. And then I think there is a huge systemic change happening that is very exciting. I see a lot of signals. So I want to talk about where I see we're going, kind of as a planet, and how tech is playing a role, actually an outsized role, in building this new world. And I'm a little bit concerned about some of the ethical kind of foundations that some tech builders are standing on. So I want to give a couple of tips and tricks on how to maybe think twice when you're building technology that's going to change the world.
Awesome. And when do you think the book is going to come live?
Oh, I hope it will come this year, but I have to get a little bit lucky. I'm still looking for the right partners to publish it with. I would love it to come out in the US first, or maybe the UK, but I've written it in English, so let's see. I'm open for help to get it to the right publisher or the right agent. Yeah, I think I did things the wrong way around. I wrote it first and then trying to figure out what book it is, but
okay. Well, interesting. And I quickly want to do the top 3. What's your favorite business book?
One book that really made an impression, it's old now, I think it came out in 2014, was The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Moto. I loved how personal and kind of half insane it was, but I liked that it was human. I like that he brought in like the human aspects of building something. And I should also say, I read this probably when it came out. I'm sure I would read it very differently today, but it definitely made an impression as I read it. I also like Girl Boss by Sofia Amoroso because I saw so much of myself in her energy. I had not built a great company when I read it, and she's very impressive in many ways that I'm not in this. We're different, but I still felt very inspired as I read her book. And then another book that I also really just kept thinking about was Invisible Women, about the data gender gap. I think that's a really important book for people to read. It was eye-opening, understanding that when we don't collect data that is gender specific, we are basically collecting data on men. And that's a problem where we're trying to build a world that works not only for straight white men. So
yeah, got it. Interesting. I mean, Hard Things About Hard Things, the Girl Boss, a great book. So we're going to put that in the show notes. I've not read Invisible Woman. I'm going to read it after this part, but we'll put that in the show notes. And if you could go back in time when you started building Clue, what is the one thing you would have focused on or done anything differently?
Yeah, I mean, it's a philosophy of mine. I don't regret anything because you always do the best. And I think it's arrogant to think that you could have done anything differently really than you did, because you did your really best all the time. I would have gotten really strong technical leadership into the company faster. That's probably the one thing where I'm like, that was a mistake. We also kind of just got a bit unlucky. And, I have many good excuses, but fundamentally, having had really good technical leadership earlier would have saved us a lot of trouble.
Got it. Interesting. And do you have a favorite online tool or any tool that you that's your favorite?
Of course, I think we made a list. I think we had 80 different online tools that we used at Clue. It's actually a huge expense post, by the way. So we, all the well-knowns. But when I really think about an important tool, I'm going to say a Hug. Because a Hug, yes. Because I think when you manage to build a culture where people feel comfortable and it's natural that they give each other a hug, when they see each other or something went well or something is going really crap, that's such a sign of health. It's a sign of real human connection, sign of support, a sign of you being able to share this crazy roller coaster. And a hug doesn't come entirely by itself. I think it's a leadership skill to build an organization where people want to give each other a hug. And especially now with hybrid, workplaces and Corona, it's getting harder to get a hug.
Yeah.
So leaders who can create organizations where people give a hug, that's a really awesome tool.
Got it. It's super interesting. And Ida, what is the best way people can reach out to you and know more about yourself, Clue, and Directness?
Where can people reach out?
Yeah.
I think I'm getting better at LinkedIn, but I will say there has been times where I did not read LinkedIn messages for many months. But that is probably a good place. Yeah.
Got it. We'll put that in the show notes. Ida, thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us. I really enjoyed my conversation with you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for all your good questions. Go ahead.
All right, thank you.